Welcome, everyone. We are live. I still have this piece of hair. It's not going away. It's going to bother me all day. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network, where we talk about both the little things and the big things. Y'all, I am so excited for this show. This one has been on my mind since I first started the network. And it took some finagling, and I had to find the right person for it. And now, here we are. So, welcome to our premiere episode of Fix Work. And we are going to be talking about what work is, what's wrong with work, and how we fix it. Like, don't overcomplicate things here. Let's start from the top. Joa, please introduce yourself. Tell us why you're here and why fixing work matters to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Briar. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about this. I could talk about this all day long, and I do. I'm lucky to do it for work. I am a career strategist. I have my own company, Carte Blanche Careers, and I help people figure out what it is that they want to do for work and how to do it in a way that's going to check the boxes for them, which can look a lot of different ways. I offer tailored services that help people really delve into what it is that they want to do, what it is that they're great at, and how they're going to be compensated for it, which looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. So I'm very excited to be talking about this with you. I'm excited about this little series that we've got going on, and today is going to be really a rich conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm so psyched. Okay, so let's start at the top. What is work?
Yes. Work is, broadly speaking, tasks that you do and are compensated for. I think that there's a lot of conversation that goes on about the intersection of things that you're great at, sort of instinctually, intuitively, and how to get paid for those things to make it even better. But I have a background in psychology. I'm a trained therapist. I love psychology. I love how people's brains work. And so I'm also very interested in things like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So the idea is that what we want to do comes from a motivated place, but there are sort of external rewards that we can get for doing those things. There are internal rewards for doing those things. And I'm particularly interested at what happens to people about 5, 10, 12 years into a career where they've been going through various steps, having different experiences, not necessarily with a strategy in mind, but they may have hit some sort of plateau or some sort of feeling that it's not right anymore. And so I think people's motivation is a huge factor that comes into that. That's really interesting. And then the compensation piece, which I'm particularly interested in coming from an anti-capitalist framework, because compensation is not equitable for all the things that get done in the umbrella of work. And
Correct.
so, and definitely when we look at the world, not just within the United States, which is where I'm located, which is where you're located, but compensation across the globe varies incredibly. It's a vast span of what we're looking at here. So I'm really interested in what kinds of systems exist outside of the United States, what we can learn from it, what we can incorporate into our own systems. Really coming up with better practices, with ways to fix work.
So, that presupposes work needs to be fixed. And you and I definitely agree that work needs to be fixed. But let's talk about some of the ways that it's broken.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, should we just take turns going back and forth?
Yeah, I think we can rapid fire this one.
Yeah, all right, you start and we'll just go back and forth. We'll see how many ways we can come up
Um,
with.
Remote or the lack thereof of remote and asynchronous work.
Yes, absolutely. Transparency around compensation within organizations and across industries.
transparency about job descriptions. What's my job? What's your job? Who does what? And what happens if there is overlap or an empty void?
Mm, mhm, absolutely. How about, accommodations and who regulates them?
Here's another one on accommodations: having to ask for them and then providing documentation that I need them in the first place.
Mhm, mhm. How about who oversees any policy and whether it's implemented properly or not?
Hiring, firing, who does it, who's responsible for it, how we communicate about it.
Mhm. Profits over people?
Ooh. Mm. Uh, Lack of transparency around the business's financials, not just an employee's, but what the business is making, how it's making money, who that money's going to.
Yes. Yeah. Who benefits from the systems of work,
There it
really is what
is.
that comes down to.
Quid
Who
bono.
benefits?
Who benefits? Yeah.
That's what we wanna know.
hmm And in most cases, I think you and I would agree that work benefits the shareholders and very rarely the stakeholders.
Interesting, interesting. Yes. Yes. It benefits people who somehow have the least invested in a certain sense. I know that, shareholders may have a monetary investment, but again, it's that profit over people, right? They're not
Mhm.
showing up 9 to 5 or
No.
8 to 6 or whatever god awful hours it might be to do the work at hand. But their investment is prioritized over people who are literally investing their time, their bodies, their creativity, their ideas, their efforts, all of the things. Mhm. Oh, I lost your volume.
Oh, it's me. It's always me. It's Mercury. It's fine. And it's incumbent upon the stakeholders to produce for the shareholders.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, that production, right? That's sort of
Mhm.
the root of capitalism is that it's dependent on production, 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 production. And if production ceases, then the whole system breaks down.
So we were talking about this before we came on. I read an article about autonomous agents, and I'll link it in the show notes.
Mm,
It's the latest development of AI. And what it's going to do, y'all, is you're going to be able to train an autonomous agent to perform tasks for you.
mhm,
Need to hire a social media manager? Now you can just train an autonomous agent and you
mm,
give it directives, and it's going to go out and do those things for you.
mm,
The article said that within the next 5 years, 95% of people will actually be working for autonomous agents. And I don't think that we can really understate the ways in which work right now is changing
mm,
so fast.
mhm,
We'll record this. It's the end of April. We will be out of date 2 weeks from now.
mhm.
When we record our next episode, there will have been innovations in tech and the way work happens, because that's how fast it's happening right now. How do we prepare for that?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. I feel like I probably would be one of the shareholders if I if I cracked that code, right? But I think that, part of it is that it's this funny duality that we live with of the innovations are going so fast, but the systems are so antiquated, right? And that mismatch, I think, is where a lot of the rug points are, in what we're seeing. And I think that part of the answer to your question is we figure out ways of bringing the systems more current. And yes, content will be outdated quickly, but we can learn from what's around us, from what other people are doing, and we can work on developing systems that are going to iterate and pivot better, more accurately, faster, to accommodate the needs of the people who are part of these systems.
I have another show, y'all, with Faith Clark, who is brilliant. We're talking about work culture design. And a
Mm,
lot of this is going to be instrumental in the things we're talking about here because structurally, foundationally, the way that we fix work isn't about the tech.
mhm.
It's not about the tools. It's about the systems in which we are working with and for people.
Yes. Yes.
So, how do we identify what the stress points are in that system and how to fix it?
Well, it has to do with changing a mindset away from profits over people over profits. And it's not even that binary, really. It's just prioritizing people. I see Will Sullivan joined us here, and he and I have been doing LinkedIn audio lives each month about kindness. And Will talks a lot about kindness and leadership. And I think that that whole framework comes from a perspective of putting people first, understanding that as a leader within these systems, that you have to prioritize people, including yourself. You are also a person, unless you're an autonomous agent, in which case you're not. That gets blurry quick, right?
Right.
but but prioritizing the people within the system is a huge first step, and that comes from looking at kindness. Comes from looking at empathy. It comes from looking at these sort of human connection points, which sounds in some ways very like, emotionally oriented and not really business oriented. But I would argue that there has to be some overlap. There has to be a weaving together of those in order for us to develop really resilient systems.
And the problem is in the ways that we dehumanize rather than emphasizing human needs as we develop these systems.
Mhm.
So, how do we kind of check on those things? What are we looking at when it comes to identifying the breaks?
Mhm. I had a conversation about this, relatively recently within the past couple of weeks about, uh, taking inventory, doing an internal inventory of how things are going and developing reflective practices about how to do that, so that that way you're kind of preempting the breaks. You're finding the weak spots before it gets to the breaking point. And, this is a practice that as individuals we can all cultivate, which helps prevent against burnout, which helps build resiliency, which helps us really be strategic about what's going to work well for us. And I think that I'm a big fan of the idea of parallel structure. So I think that, we can think of it almost as like the individual at the center and then the systems built up in rings around that individual. And the parallel process part of this is that what the individual does is felt within the rings, right? So it's a matter in some ways of starting at the individual and then building our way outward to make sure that, it gets impacted further and further from our actual individual selves into the systems.
there are so many places my mind wants to take this. And I think where I want to go with it is that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mm,
as a branch of corporate structure has
mhm,
taken a hit. It
mm,
is
mhm.
one of the biggest layoffs that we've seen in recent tech layoffs. And we're also very aware that there's some real disparity here about who is our DEI leadership, because in terms of both race and gender, there is less equity than one could hope for.
Right.
So, what I see then is that we're aware of the things that we should be doing.
Mhm,
We pay lip service to them.
mhm.
We are not actually fixing any of these problems.
No, no, and the lip service is a huge problem. I think to a certain extent, DEI got systemically impacted by that last one in, first one out effect that people often see in layoffs at an individual level. It's almost like department wise. That's what ended up happening. But you're absolutely right. And it's important to acknowledge that any of the things that we talk about that need fixing, any of the impacts that we talk about as being felt by people within these systems are amplified and felt more and harder by anybody who has a marginalized identity, let alone a multiple marginalized identity. And these impacts are not all created equal. They really aren't. For as much as our systems are also not created equal, we're not treated equally within them. Same goes for the impacts of all of the things we're talking about.
Oh, it's delightful. Recording live with
Recording live,
children,
life happens.
always such a delight. Okay, so what what do we do? How do we get out of this cycle where we are only interested in pretending like we're doing something about it?
Yeah, I mean, people don't like this answer, but you gotta shake things up. The
I know nobody
status
likes this
quo is what
answer.
got us here, and
Mhm.
we can't hope that things are gonna change if we maintain the status quo. So, the shakeup has to happen one way or another. And, there's some easy answers, and I say easy in that, like, there've been a lot of people saying them for a long time, but we need to actually follow through on them. We need other diverse voices in leadership calling the shots, making the decisions. We need decolonized perspectives and frameworks for how we adjust our systems. We need to put our money where our mouth is, right? With our
Mhm.
whole profit situation and prioritize people, and you talked about the dehumanizing that happens, it's the whole system that we're operating under is one where there's just an incredible lack of respect that develops, right? And gets cultivated and encouraged, right? We don't respect ourselves. We don't respect our own boundaries on our own time and rest and need for, nourishment and help and all of the things that we need as human beings. Then we don't respect other people's time and boundaries and need
Mhm.
for all of those things, right? That respect piece, I think, is something that is really missing. It's really missing. And we need to, if we're going to make changes, we need to be conscious and intentional about how it is that we're going to affect change.
I was reading an article from Anne Helen Peterson, who I adore, last week, and she was talking about how the higher educated, the less uh, structure there is around time balance,
Mm,
that people who are more educated and make more money are also working more hours
mhm,
because They have phones that they're taking emails on at 11 p.m. from bed. And so we've created this culture where it's not just the work, it's the idea of the work and the ways in which we are doing it that are so fundamentally flawed.
Yes. Yes. And I've got almost nothing but positive things to say about remote work options, asynchronous work options. I think that that is such an important need that we need to prioritize culturally, both within the United States, but also just within work cultures. I think that that needs to be a priority because it allows for so many things, inclusion of more diverse skill sets, flexibility for people who have a lot of constraints on their day-to-day lives for a lot of different reasons. But, I think it's the only sort of downside to this piece of it is that the remote asynchronous work options necessitate firmer individual boundaries around that. I work with a lot of people, across a lot of different industries, and oftentimes the people who have the best work-life balance are people who work for the government because there are very firm rules and regulations about when and how you can access your work product. And you can't be lying in bed scrolling on your phone checking your work email because that's not a thing. You
Because
can't
that's
do it.
not a thing.
You can't do it. But somebody who's hired for low entry, middle management,
Mhm.
even higher level within organizations that don't have those firm rules and regulations. Oh man, does it get encouraged to be on the ball and to be responsive and to be available, right? We've all seen that meme that has gone around with like the US work perspective. It's like, sorry, I'm having major surgery, but I'll get back to you from the recovery room, right? Like,
Right.
that's not a joke. That's what is implicitly and often explicitly even encouraged in our work cultures, and that's not okay.
And I think that one extends to North American work culture in general. I know a lot of Canadians who
Mm,
have similar mindsets, but it's a very uniquely American, North American ideology. Additionally, asynchronous work and the fuzziness of time around it is probably most detrimental to women and people who are coded femme because they are taking care of all of the emotional labor while working at home and managing kids and the household and all of those things.
yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what a, what happens now? We're on this threshold, right? We can very clearly see that the way that we're doing things isn't working.
Mm,
We can see that there are some possibilities available to us, like a 4-day work week. I mean, the research on that one is universal at this point in time. It works for everybody,
yeah.
but we're still not changing things. So, how do we help see this shift?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it has to be sort of both internally grassroots grown, but it also has to be externally supported with, rules and regulation around it. And I, that, boy, again, I wish I had the answers. I wish I had the answers, but I think that when the system, like the larger, maybe like if we're talking maybe federal regulations around work, right, around labor laws, around accommodations, right, all of these kinds of things, when that system doesn't support the people who it's supposed to support, then either companies just do whatever they want, which has happened for a long time, or as we saw begin to shift a little during the pandemic, when all of a sudden workers had more leverage to say, listen, without us, you've got nothing. So here's what we want, right? We didn't see it at nearly the levels we should have. And that's one of my sadnesses about, what the impacts have been from the pandemic, is that we could have gotten to a point where we had all kinds of leverage for people who are doing the work, for the stakeholders, the way you talked about. But we need companies to sort of create these systems independently if the larger system isn't supporting it. And the way we do that is by people choosing where they want to work based on what they're offering, right? There's a, the company Chani is offering all kinds of incredible sort of perks for working there, like a minimum salary, like all kinds of benefits, just really like
Menstrual leave,
menstrual leave.
y'all.
Yeah, menstrual leave, like just incredible things, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if they're flooded with applications when their job postings go up, because that's what people want. We need that en masse, right? And what I think I see with the layoffs that are happening is that it's not so much about laying off those people and saving the money on the salaries. It's really an intimidation tactic oftentimes. And especially when we started seeing all of those articles come out about the contagion effect of the layoffs, and sort of industry saying, oh, well, if they're doing it, we'll do it. It almost felt senseless. And that was sort of the point, right? It was almost like a random selection of people would get laid off. And it was so that all of the people left are thinking, oh God, it could be me next. Better be available at 11 p.m. Better, be emailing you back from the recovery room. I don't want to be next.
And there are some conflicting facts here. So I'm just going to give you some numbers and we'll attempt to parse this in the best way possible.
Let's do it.
There are, according to current numbers, approximately 1.9 jobs per US job seeker.
Right.
However, only 60% of the available workforce is actually employed. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that other 40% of available workers are not employed, but that's still an incredibly high threshold of people who are, in many cases, those 40% are incredibly disadvantaged. So we're talking they're not employed because they're on disability benefits and cannot make more than their benefits, or they will lose those benefits. So it's
Mhm.
enforced poverty.
Right.
When we compare that to the number of jobs available, and the number of bad jobs too, right? The number of people who are leaving jobs. So the numbers right now that I have on that is approximately 10 weeks is the nationwide turnover rate
Huh.
in Fortune 500 companies. So that's going to be a lot of fast food and quick service. But 10 weeks, people stay at a job for 2.5 months and then go, there are greener pastures elsewhere.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of jobs. There
Mhm.
are a lot of bad jobs, and
Mhm.
there are a lot of people who cannot work because the jobs are either bad or they cannot risk making more money. What do we even make of that?
I mean, work needs fixing is what we make of it, right? And I would just also add to what you said. People don't just leave after 10 weeks because there's greener pastures.
Oh, no, no, no.
People leave even if there's no other pasture.
Right.
And the reason why is because the level of work that you're talking about here will cost people money to perform, right? And that's where pay equity, living wage, all of these things come into play. Because when we're talking about very marginalized people, people in extreme hardship, right? They might get a job that they can hold for 10 weeks, but maybe they have to take excessive public transportation to be able to get there, cutting into not just the financial piece because they have to pay for that public transportation,
But
but then
also the time.
but also the time, right? The unpaid time for commuting, right? And then those jobs are ones that are incredibly taxing on physical health, on mental health, on just wellness in general, right? People are doing jobs where they have to be standing for incredible amounts of time, where they're not given appropriate breaks, where all of these things build up, right? People's bodies start to break down in much shorter than 10 weeks sometimes under these kinds of conditions.
And there are no benefits because they haven't even made it to 12 weeks, 90 days, at which they're entitled to those benefits.
That's right. So all of a sudden you have someone who's paying money for transportation, paying in time to take that transportation, paying for supplies to help themselves get through the day, right? Paying more money for food because they can't cook it at home, paying for maybe medical appointments to be able to see somebody who can help their body feel better after having been standing for 8 hours 5 days a week, right? Like all of a sudden you add up those costs, it costs people money to work.
Right. Which is why I guess it's fine that Amazon has 150% turnover rate because they are happier to churn through those employees than ever to get them to a place where they are given raises or benefits or any kind of meaningful, I don't know, humanity in that kind of job, right?
Right, right. And so who does that benefit, right? Like Amazon, of course, is doing fine on their bottom line. So is it just the shareholders that this benefits? What is the benefit? Who is benefiting from churning, literally churning through people?
And I think Amazon is a really good question because those people that we don't care about who are sacrificing their literal bodies are making sure you're getting your packages in 2 days or less.
Right.
So the customer here, I suppose, does benefit, but there are some problems on the customer end too, which we can perhaps get into another day or on another
Mhm.
show because
Mhm.
Amazon does not actually benefit its customers in most ways either.
Mhm.
So, what are we left with here?
What are our bottom lines?
Right.
Well, I think we've really discussed that work needs fixing, Briar.
Oh, yeah. Like at this point in time, I'm like, wow, this has been a fun ride.
Yeah. It feels like, you can feel the heaviness of it, right? We've been pretty upbeat in our conversation. You and I have great conversations about these things, and we love to really tease them out, but it's heavy. It's heavy. The weight of this is heavy, and the weight of this, again, it's felt disproportionately. And the people who are already hurting, are already carrying heavy loads, are bearing the most weight of the broken system. Maybe not the broken system, maybe the system that is working exactly as it intended.
And I think there's probably some room to have that argument. But for us here, I think the next question that we ask is where do we start?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I'm sure you have ideas. What's Should we go back and forth again? Do a rapid round of where we
Yeah,
start?
this feels let's finish it on a high note
I
here.
know, I know. Well, here's what I'll say. I I was very hopeful about the sort of power swing that we saw during the pandemic, right? That people who were working those 9 to 5s or 8 to 6s were having some choice, having some agency, having some power to bring to the table to negotiate for things that they needed. And I think that where we fell short on the US side of things is that we didn't do it collectively or at scale.
And while that continues to be true, there is now more labor organization than there has been in this country for over 100 years.
Wow.
And while most people are highly distrustful of labor and labor unions, I think that collective organizing is going to have a renaissance. I think
Yes.
that if you pay attention to the ways in which the internet has allowed us to organize together,
Mhm.
that now there are places like the anti-work subreddit where hundreds of thousands of people are learning about collective organization that
That's
were not before.
That's right. That's right. And it's been a very targeted propaganda machine that has made people distrustful of collective action in these ways, right? And when you see behind the curtain, then you know, right? There's no going back. But I think exactly what you're talking about, the internet has in some senses been a great equalizer, right? And so, making sure that we're staying vigilant too about access to internet being something that is as equitable as it can be, that is as free as it can be for people, so that way the people who need it have access to those collective spaces. That's where the sweet spot is. And you're right, it's more activity in this area, in this arena than we've seen in probably 100 years. I was going to say 60 conservatively, but it's probably a lot
It,
more. You're
it,
right.
it's longer.
Yep.
Additionally, I think the kids are gonna be all right, y'all. Gen Z is exercising more autonomy when it comes to their employment than ever before.
Mhm.
And highly educated college kids are coming out of college and going into workplaces to organize deliberately, specifically. And I think there's a lot of conversations and there's a lot of nuance to be had about this. It's a term, it's called salting. I'll link some articles in the show notes.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I think the fact that that generation is so aware of
Mm.
what work is and is not and should not be, it gives me hope.
I agree. I agree. I'm incredibly hopeful about it, and I think, I'm an older millennial, and I spent a fair number of years being like, "Oh, the young ones," right? But no, the young ones, and what I see is our responsibility for older generations is to really foster and support and protect their interests as they find their feet and they do the thing, and not fight it. There's, as an older millennial, I grew up with a lot of people older than me saying, "Oh, you can't do that. That's not how it's done," right? And that sort of just tends to be how it goes with generations, right? But we need to understand that the ultimate goal here is that we all get a better situation out of it. And we may not like their tone or whatever, but if they're working towards this collective place that's going to benefit all of us, we need to get on board. We need to get on board and we need to make sure that they have a clear path to do it.
And for me, the last note in terms of the collective is that more people than ever before are aware that it's not about race and it's not about gender, it's about class. This is the divide
Mhm,
that we are currently butting up against.
mhm,
And the 1% of the 1% that owns 90% of the globe, and 97 or so percent of the capital
Mhm.
cannot just do whatever they want anymore.
Right.
There is an increasing amount of pushback against billionaire bullies and the things that they have and continue to do with the money that they make. And that accountability, I don't think has truly ever existed before. But now I can go to Elon Musk on the platform that he owns and tell him that he's an idiot. And y'all, friends, that's a gift that
Mhm.
we get to explore and continue to grow.
Right. 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 And keep pushing the envelope. Keep pushing the envelope, to the follow through, to the redistribution, because the 1% of 1% owning 90%, 7% of capital, we're seeing real clearly it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. But the less we have to lose, the quicker the fall is going to happen, right?
So I think that's what we're hopeful about. And I think then as we go forward into this series, and folks, would definitely solicit any input you have here. Anything you want to hear us talk about, leave it in the comments. Feel free to send an email. We'll talk about places to find us here in a minute. This discussion involves all of us. We don't fix work on an individual level. That doesn't work. It's the collective that matters here. So how do we grow it? How do we build it? How do we have those discussions that elevate the process?
Mhm.
And we will be back here in 2 weeks for the next episode. Joa, what are we talking about?
Man, I want to talk about more of all of this, Briar. There was some talk that we talked about related to what happens when we're not just the employee, but when we flip and become an entrepreneur, when we start running the business, right? I think that duality is one that's felt by a lot of people. I would be really interested in exploring that more. And I would really like to talk about that from the perspective of, for people who are doing that. We've seen such a huge uptick of people
Mhm.
starting their own businesses during the pandemic. Incredible numbers of women entrepreneurs, of people of color entrepreneurs who are starting their own businesses for the first time. How do we take what we've learned, what we've internalized from our entire work history and our entire professional lives, and how do we enact something different from the status quo when we're the ones who get to call the shots? And I think that would be a real fun place to go to. But let's keep doing all of this and let's hear from people about what they want to talk about.
And I will say there is a big difference between fixing work at scale for hundreds or thousands of employees and fixing work for one or a few. However, shockingly, many of you would be surprised to learn you have taken those habits and customs of the work of hundreds or thousands and internalized it and brought it into your business of one or a few. So I think that's a perfect place to start. Let's micro businesses and then we'll take it out to the macro.
Let's do it.
And y'all, I am so excited about this. This is going to be a really, really fun discussion. So, if you've heard, if you've listened, if you've benefited from this, feel free to share the work. This will be up later today on the neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. Joa will have access to this here. You can share these live streams. Truly, what we're about is getting everyone out into the world and having these conversations. Joa, where can the people find you?
Mostly on LinkedIn. That's where I like to hang out. So find me on LinkedIn. I've got my personal profile page. Hit me up anytime. Slide into my DMs, whatever you want. I've got a website where you can book discovery calls with me as well, linked from my LinkedIn profile. Come find me. Let's talk. If you need help with your career strategy, I would love to hear about it.
We will have all of those links in the show notes as well. Thank you all so much for being here today. This is what the Neurodiversity Media Network is about. We are about these discussions, this depth, going into the things with a little bit more nuance, and I am really excited to see where this series goes. Thank you all for being here. Have an amazing day.